Hi, Brian Haratzis here, reporting on the next steps in the polycentric cities research, or better known as many-centred cities project. The idea of the project was to examine whether or not the concept of a many-centred city was actually working. It is the prime framework which is used for Sydney and Melbourne, and to also ask the question, if that framework is being used, is it actually achieving the kinds of outputs that are anticipated? And so, for example, our research was to understand whether or not the concept of a multi-centred city would lead to less commuting time, whether consumers were really interested in less commuting time, whether, as things currently stand in Sydney, the distribution of employment nodes reflects where people would like to live, and how that actually affects people's livability and future city centre or city structure opportunities. In doing this, we undertook two key pieces of research. Firstly, a commuter survey. And the purpose of the commuter survey is to understand how people currently travel by mode, how long they actually travel for, but also, and most importantly, to understand their views on whether they would like to work closer to home. The second part of the research that we undertook was an analysis of industry structures. In particular, we were looking at the future structures for business to establish, is it a small or medium enterprise or larger enterprise, or what are the key drivers of new employment going into the future. Unpacking that, what we have found is that in terms of commuters and in terms of the connection between where people live and where people work, there were around 50% of respondents stated that they didn't want necessarily to live any closer to work. Macroplan did not find that a surprising outcome, because our research has demonstrated over a period of time that human capital, which is social networks, professional networks, the ability for career advancement, is actually really tied into the inner and middle rings, where the educational opportunity and the growth sectors of the future are. So those service sector growth areas of tourism, fintech, finance, IT, media, professional scientific services are actually quite centralised. So the first and most important part of our research has established that our understanding of polycentric cities means that to, in fact, create a many-centred city will mean that we will need to work a lot harder on city centres outside of the CBD of Sydney. So, for example, this would mean Parramatta CBD would need to at least double its size to become attractive enough for people to say, no, I'd actually prefer to live closer to Parramatta than to Sydney CBD. Now, this is an interesting outcome, given that around 50% of respondents actually commuted more than 45 minutes a day. The second part of the research really focused on industry structure. And in terms of industry structure, what we found was that the fastest growing areas in Australia in business are small to medium-sized enterprises of 1 to 4 people. Now, this industry structure is interesting insofar as it is not concentrated in Sydney CBD. In fact, it's spread throughout Sydney. It's quite different, but it is the fastest growing. And in fact, what has happened, according to a study undertaken by the Australian Bureau of Statistics in conjunction with the OECD, is that small to medium-sized enterprises, that's 1 to 4 people, actually added 40% to the Australian workforce in the last 10 years. Now, understanding and putting these pieces together in terms of spatial outcomes for Sydney and an understanding of multi-centred cities becomes extremely important. So how do we interpret this? Well, from a macro plan point of view, the first part of the equation is that spatially we need to actually grow Parramatta substantially. We need to double the employment size of Parramatta and aerially expand the opportunities for Parramatta itself so that smaller businesses can locate in existing dwellings, they can buy existing dwellings and warehouses, but on a much broader scale than was ever thought before. Failure to do this, according to our research, will mean that the true polycentric outcome required, which is, will I live closer to work, will not actually occur. If we extended this thinking into Western Sydney, for example, it would suggest to us that over time, and let's say it takes another 10 or 15 years to get Parramatta close to the sorts of sizes that we want it to be, this would mean that in Western Sydney, we would need a third major centre over time. That's based on current technologies and based on what we currently know. However, there are a number of things we don't know. And so as part of our contextual research, Macro Plan has looked at the impacts or potential implications of automated vehicles and the Internet of Things. And so what is becoming clear to us is that at the moment, we can't actually identify a single location which might be the best candidate for a third major centre. Could it be an aerotropolis at Badgerys Creek? Could it be Liverpool? Could it be Penrith? We're not sure. And the reasons that we're not sure, whether it's any of those or Campbelltown, is that in this period, in the next 15 years, the introduction of automated vehicles will occur. We also don't know, as things currently stand, whether and when heavy rail and light rail will be introduced into the Western sector. And we understand that unless those infrastructures are actually placed early or built early, the situation will be a rollout of business on a business as usual basis, i.e. we will not get the services sectors to locate in distributed locations in broadacre, and what will happen is higher value jobs will not actually occur in those locations and commuting times will increase unless Parramatta becomes an intervening opportunity in that time frame. The second major spatial set of implications that have come out of our research are that in the growth of the small to medium enterprise sector, the most important issues are around an opportunity to locate and rent in areas where there are collaborative opportunities and multiplier opportunities. To give you an example, historically, Surrey Hills was a place where incubation naturally occurred because small businesses would move in, they would rent a small premises, it would be close to the CBD, you could develop a business network in the CBD, and ultimately you could afford to move your business into the CBD. Surrey Hills today, however, is an expensive area. Small businesses could not afford to move into a location like Surrey Hills. So where do they move? Well, the issue in Sydney is that there have been no logical locations for the small to medium-sized enterprises, the innovators, the high-techs, to actually move. So what our study is suggesting is in fact that mixed use and many-centred opportunities are available. That means, for example, that locationally loosening up and deregulating around several major centres, and our suggestions would be concentrating it to the west initially, but it could actually occur throughout the metropolitan area, to enable small to medium enterprises to rent, firstly, secondly, to allow developers to move in and to be able to provide new space, and perhaps they would need to combine that with some residential to make it worthwhile or to make it profitable, so that what we're seeing is potentially a new and different development format occurring in Sydney. Now, the rationale that sits behind this is similar to the rationale of growing Sydney, which is to make Sydney a global location and to attract global talent. We need to be able to modify, enhance and innovate in urban structure. As we move through the rest of this report and the rest of our recommendations and suggestions, there will be a range of policy implications which will become clearer. What we can say today is that this is truly a global piece of research and incredibly exciting. Thank you very much.